on hope is there. I can't remember the full. It's about science. Hope in reason. It's right there. Can science explain everything? I'm Karen, by the way. I'm a third-year student.
I'm Will. I'm also a third-year student doing physics. So, yeah, I'm quite looking forward to this one.
Yes. So, what is Hope? It's just a week of events that we've been putting on as a CU, Christian Union. We've had a lot of different events, a lot of food, but most importantly, some talks, just explaining a bit about what we're about as a Christian Union. We put things on weekly throughout the year, but just this week we've got stuff on every day to be getting involved with. So without further ado, I'll invite up our speaker, Sarah.
Hello. Before we get started, in typical CU tradition, we have a silly question, which today is...
I actually don't know what this question is. So.
What country in the world would you most like to go to the toilet in?
So I'm here to speak about something, and I'm to find somewhere to use the bathroom. So, thanks for your introduction, guys. So last night, I was speaking at Dean Close School in Cheltenham. I don't know if anyone is familiar with that school. Honestly, the bathrooms were like a hotel. I literally could have ran the talks from the bathroom, so I'm just going to say the school I was in last night.
That's so funny. I'm actually from Cheltenham, so I know a lot of people that went there, although I didn't myself. So yeah, if you just want to tell us a bit about yourself, what you do, and then we'll just hand it over to you to tell us.
Okay. Hello everyone, thank you so much for coming out here during your lunchtime to engage with this talk. Thanks guys for your warm welcome as well. So my name is Sarah Stevenson. I grew up in the land of milk and honey, which is of course Ireland. Was obsessed with the big questions, I think through high school. My laptop is literally about to capsize, so this is maybe you guys could come up and, while I'm introducing myself, secure. I know that you two in the front row were like, she's going to lose her laptop. Grew up in Ireland, studied religion and education for my undergraduate degree. Then I did my master's in the philosophy of science, hence the topic today, through the University of Edinburgh. And then moved to Oxford and I studied apologetics for a year. Moved back to Ireland in teaching and now have moved back to England again to work full-time as an apologist for the OCA. And the OCA is an apologetics centre. So apologetics, what is that? Well, it simply means that if something is true, it makes sense of things. It's not just true in a spiritual sense, it's something that makes sense of the whole universe. And that's what we're engaged with is, how does Christianity make sense of who we are and the world that we live in? So that's what I do. I'm going to let you do your thing down there while we kick off in the talk. Here we go. Does the clicker work? If you can move it on at the back, that would be wonderful. These are teething problems at the start of this. Here we go. Does science explain everything? Thank you. Does science explain everything? Well, sometimes the appearance of that, thank you. Sometimes the appearance of that would suggest, yes, just as the guys fix the stand here, I'm going to talk to you. You will see on the screen a BBC News alert. Now, this was an article that came up in the BBC a couple of months ago about a story that happened with a 22-year-old yoga teacher. So she had rented a room and she had 7 clients and they were participating in yoga. And the way that they were in the room was these 7 clients were on the floor. That's all right. These 7 clients were on the floor meditating with this yoga teacher kind of like looking like she was hovering over them. Now, outside the building, there is a couple of dog walkers that come along and they look in through the window and they see this very creepy looking person hovering over 7 bodies. So they're like, okay, back away from the window, back away. And they go and they take their phones and they call the police. And they say, something terrible has happened. We think there's like 7 bodies. You need to get down to this venue ASAP. This yoga class has sirens. And the police arrive and they open up to discover that this is a very innocent yoga lesson and no one has been murdered and there is no freaky person hovering over bodies. But the appearance of it to the dog walkers was that this was something sinister. And whenever I read that article, it really stood out to me that it is the appearance that it would seem to suggest that science explains everything, and it's the appearance that Christianity doesn't seem to explain anything. And I want to suggest to you today in this lunchtime talk that the appearance is not the reality. But I do also want to show you where this accusation and where this appearance comes from. 2 summers ago, I was on a hiking trip with my sister in Austria. So beautiful, the Alps are amazing, we were loving our walking. But unfortunately, one day it starts to storm and it's raining, and if you've been in the Alps and a storm comes, you know what I mean. It was really raining. So we knew that for a day we were going nowhere but the hotel. So what do I decide to do? I decide to read a novel. And if we move on to the next slide, my clicker is now working, wonderful. I started to read this story. Lessons in Chemistry. If you're not a reader, it's on Apple TV. Has anyone seen the show or read the book? Good, we have a couple in the room. The primary plot of this novel is that in the 60s, Elizabeth Zott, as a scientist, can't have her own lab. Why? Because she's a woman in the 60s trying to make a move in a field that is basically saying she doesn't belong. So that's the primary purpose of the book. So you could say, if you're a female and you're into science, that's a wonderful story. But the secondary part of the plot is that in order for women to have freedom, that religion and Christianity must be something to be capsized. So what do we have in this book? We have the interwoven story that science and freedom need to ditch Christianity in order to be freed, in order to progress. And in fact, in this novel and story, I couldn't believe it, that one of the minor characters who was a church leader, he is even embarrassed, apparently, by the evidence, by the scientific evidence. There's no rationality behind faith. It's not always been this way. Before the 19th century, as a human race, we've always been interested in how different disciplines come together to help us be informed, to help us analyze the world and ourselves and the universe. But from the 19th century, this is when science was demarcated, and it was held that other disciplines like theology and philosophy, that they no longer held the same value as science. And so for the first time in the 19th century, we have what has emerged as the conflict thesis. And the conflict thesis is to say that if science is to be liberated and to have freedom of knowledge, that it has to be without the restraint of religion. That was both what John William Draper and Andrew Dickson White wrote. They both wrote books on this to say that we need to get rid of religion in order to free the scientists. Now, if you're anything like me, you have listened to the last 15, 20 years to the new atheist movement who have weaponized science and really proclaimed and heralded it as the champion over religion. Back in Northern Ireland, I grew up in a fairly religious environment. The Irish do tend to have a religious, political, generic environment. But when I went off to university, for the first time, I'm being introduced to philosophy, ethical questions, atheism. I'm now starting to read Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion, and it's become very clear to me that as a university student, there's all of these objections to the Christian faith, and this is what the new atheist movement were saying. Christianity is anti-scientific, it's primitive, it's anti-intellectual, and it's dangerous. Now, I want you to notice the interwoven nature of these objections, because on the one hand, they're saying it's anti-scientific and anti-intellectual, but they're weaving that with moral accusations. That the Bible is something not to be trusted, that it's dangerous, that Christianity is oppressive, and these things are being interwoven into the accusation that science can explain everything And not only is Christianity anti-intellectual, but something that should be morally removed. So that's the accusation that we have listened to, particularly for the last 20 years of the new atheist movement. But I want to explain to you today 3, I think, key words that will help you to engage with that, what I would say to be the false appearance. The yoga lesson, the so-called mass murder scene, was only a yoga lesson. And I want to say that I think these 3 points can really help you to see that the appearance that Christianity is anti-intellectual is only the appearance and not the reality. The first reason, or the first point is this, that we need agency to make sense of why things are so. Agency simply means intelligence, it means mind. So beyond physical processes, what is there in that intelligence that enables things to be so? I also want you to realize the difference between someone's worldview, that science has defeated religion, than actually the methods and the mechanisms of science itself. And then the third point that I'm going to leave you with is to say, not only can we defend against these accusations, but I am here today with the rigor and the academic nature of Christianity to make sense of science and religion. Aristotle, you know that you could not have a philosopher today join you without mentioning the great name. He very helpfully, and this is still studied in philosophy faculties today, said that when it comes to causes, there's always different kinds of causes that complement one another. There's always a physical or a material cause. There's always a form to that cause and a reason for the cause, the final cause, but there's also a source behind it, the efficient cause. Now let me break that down with an example. You're all sitting here on chairs, which is amazing, because then that helps you to listen to this Irish woman engage with science and religion. But before the chair was made, someone in the history of mankind had to decide that it would be a really good idea for people to be able to sit on chairs. So a chair first exists in the mind of the chair maker before the chair is physically in the world. So what is the cause behind a chair? Well, there's multiple causes. It's the plastic or whatever it's made out of. We have a chair that has a shape enabling you to sit in it. The final cause of a chair is so that you can sit in it. But what's the efficient cause, the source, the agency? The person that thought it's a really good idea for us to sit down. What about our universe? It's made of physical stuff, but it was also in the mind of an eye, an intelligence, an agent in order to bring it so. I'm a bit of a soccer fan, I must confess. Newcastle United, whoop whoop. Coventry, I think things are maybe not just so great here for football, but there we go. One of the biggest controversies with football at the minute is the use of VAR technology. So this is football meets science. We've put cameras into the game, we've stuck extra referees into a video control room, and we're asking them to freeze frame the moment where the so-called, you could say, crime in the box happens. They then replay the video to see, is this a penalty, is it not? And then they then mic down to the referee in the pitch to say, yes, that should have been a penalty, no, that shouldn't have been a penalty. Now, this is what's really interesting to me. We in the 21st century can freeze frame any moment in a football match, and yet that ability has not detracted from, there is still a war of opinion about what is a foul and what is not. The referee, the mind, the intelligence is needed even if you've got the technology and the science to go along with it. Science alone is not giving us an intelligence or an agency. Some people like to use this particular example. It's one of the favorites of John Lennox, who's the president of OCA, the company that I work for. He loves this one, mainly because he loves tea and food, and so he really goes on this one. Why does somebody have a cup of tea? Well, again, there is the scientific explanation. You have the electricity going through the coil, it's bubbling the water up. There's a scientific reason that's enabling that tea to be the case. But why else do you have a cup of tea? Is because you, as a mind, as an intelligence, want it to have a cup of tea. Hence, the switch is flicked. And this is a really helpful analogy to see, isn't this the same with you? Isn't this the same with the universe? Isn't this the same thing with physical stuff that, Yes, there are the mechanisms, but that does not detract from the mind and the intelligence behind making it work. And we could do this with any theory that you want. Now, I do not know why schools teach the Big Bang Theory as if that's an opposing theory to God's existence. It was never how it was engaged with in the 20th century. Lemaitre was a Belgian scientist in the 30s who was first investigating the expansion theory. By the 60s, sarcastically, we were calling it the Big Bang, this moment where you have that expansion of heat and light. Originally, when that theory was being analyzed, scientists were saying this looks awfully like theism because it means the world was not always here. And if the universe was not always here, then what is the cause? Because you know the scientific rule, anything that comes to be has to have a cause. So they were saying, okay, the world hasn't always been here, what's the cause? So originally this theory was never meant to be, here's the Big Bang Theory or here's God's existence. It's not science versus religion. I'm going to cover one more point and get you to discuss a little bit of this. What I am elucidating with you today is that it is not science and religion that are at war, it is someone's worldview versus another person's worldview. Alvin Plantinga is one of my favorite philosophers of science. He's also a hiker, loves to climb his mountains over in America and philosophize about science. This is what he says about worldview. Naturalism, so that's the worldview that all things have evolved naturally, that there's no supernatural causes. He says that that worldview has to do something similar to that of religion. It provides opinions on whether there is a God, how we should live, what happens to us when we die. And think how the new atheist movement are acting out of a worldview. Bible's dangerous, morally questionable, insult, insult, insult. What's that got to do with science? So we're seeing science be hijacked and weaponized as a worldview and merely providing people with the appearance that religion can't stand up to rigor. And so I want you to see the difference between, just follow with me in this word, methodological naturalism and metaphysical naturalism. Methodological naturalism means, right, here we have something, how does it work? Let's look at the mechanisms. This is science because you have experiments, hypotheses. There is a way to investigate. The method is the science. What's the worldview? This is the worldview. A naturalist who has a worldview of naturalism says all things can be explained naturally. Tell me the scientific experiment that proves that. There is nothing in science that tells us that that is the case. So actually, philosophically, that is false logic. It's self-contradictory because there is no experiment that proves that worldview. So what is the reality here in this discussion is that you have naturalists projecting a worldview and theists, that's people that believe in God, projecting a worldview, where they also look at other kinds of information into saying, why is this world here? How did the universe get here? Why are we here? What about purpose? What about meaning? What's the best way to live? And theists are adding up that information into saying that God's existence makes sense. It is scientism, not science, that's trying to claim that science can explain everything. Enter stage left, Peter Atkins. He was a former Oxford-based scientist who says this: the only way to truth is through the methods of science. Okay, well, let's do a little scientific experiment. If I was to bring in a whiteboard, what would it take to put that sentence on the board? It takes a marker, it takes English literature, it takes a person. Science itself alone cannot formulate the statement. So this is a scientism, it's a worldview projection. It is not a scientific experiment to say that science itself can prove everything. Now with these 2 points, at this point I am not arguing, because we're not here to argue, I'm building a case that I think it is a worldview, that it is the appearance that science explains everything. It is not the reality, it is someone's worldview. I've also told you so far that we need agency, intelligence, mind, a personality as well to cohere with processes to bring explanation. I'm going to give you 3 minutes. Turn to the person beside you, or if you're not with someone, please don't feel intimidated by that. You can think about this. Is there anything that I've said so far that you'd like a further clarification? And then an interconnected question is there something else that you think is a glaring, obvious omission that I have not yet considered? Can you just discuss that now? You've got 3 minutes. I'm sorry, I know that you could chat for a lot longer. I hope that there's time for Q&A at the end, and that's the intention, is to bring some of those objections to light at that point. I want to finish with, on the positive note, why are we not just defending? Why do I not just stand here as a theist defending, but I'm actually saying in a positive sense that Christianity actually makes sense of science. The rationality of the laws of nature, the fact that we can investigate an intelligent universe, the coherence of nature, this has design in it. And this design argument is only something that has gained traction as science has developed. If you look at the quote on the screen, Robert J. Spitzer is both a scientist, a philosopher, and a Christian leader, and he says, if we imagine all the parameters of the universe, such as the speed of light in a vacuum, the gravitational constant, electromagnetic coupling, and the masses of the elementary particles represented by the settings of the dials of some kind of cosmic control panel, the findings of modern cosmology imply that if the settings of these dials were to be nudged even very slightly, we would not be here to discuss their significance. Sarah, in 2 seconds, what does that mean? What that means is, according to William Lane Craig, if there is a dartboard millions of light years away from Earth and you are trying to hit a dart with that dartboard, we're hitting it. This is how improbable it is that we have the conditions on Earth that we do where life is possible. It is truly astounding. Mathematically, you can't even write it down. That's why we have to write 10 to the power of, because it just is so improbable. Now, I want to make you aware of the counter objections. If we just move the screen along at the back. Because I do want you to hear what someone who is of the opposing worldview would say. They might come back at me there and say, well, what about the anthropic principle? So what that simply means is, if we're in the world and we're here and we're alive and we're observers of it, well, that means it is possible and it means that it is likely. And so I'm recognizing that, but I'm also saying, just because we are in the world and conscious and alive and evolving, that in itself is not a cause, it's not an explanation. It is merely, you could say, a tautology. We're here, the world is here. It's not an explanation, it's not a cause. What does Christianity offer? If something looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, usually is a duck. Universe highly designed, looks like design, probably designed. Just saying that it's credible. It's at least a credible hypothesis that a God exists. And then the other major objection is to say, well, could the world be part of a multiverse? Because if there are numerous worlds, well, that would make it much more likely and more probable that there could be life in one planet. But again, you're only magnifying the causes. What's the cause behind the cause behind the causes? No matter how many universes or worlds that there are, you're only magnifying the level of explanation that there needs to be there. So what I want to leave you with is, how did I end up as a Christian? I went from some sort of religion in my teenage years to becoming an atheist in my university years to then making, I would say, what is a journey back to the true Jesus. I did that cumulatively. I did look at science to see things like the fine-tuning of the universe. I looked at the complementary nature between the idea of design and the way that this world works. I believe that the lovely Sharon Dirks was with you yesterday. Love working with her. She really helpfully explains the idea that we're not just our brain, that we're conscious beings. Again, where does that consciousness come from? I also do think that on moral grounds, despite what the New Atheist movement have said, that Christianity makes most sense of morality, because don't forget there is a contradiction in that objection. Because what a naturalist says is, all things are natural, there's no ultimate meanings and purposes, and yet then they turn around and say that you should or shouldn't do something. Well, which is it? Are we here without a purpose or not? Because one minute you're telling me there is no ultimate purpose, and then the next minute you're telling me how to live my life. Well, which one is it? Because in Jesus, what we see is love, justice, reasons, design. It coheres. That cumulatively, for me, became quite convincing. And the Bible, I'm going to talk to you about this tomorrow at lunchtime, isn't just a book that's biased with some Christian opinions in it. There is a huge historicity behind those books. So again, come along tomorrow as we discuss that. We are not in, just so that you know the cultural shift, I'm sure that you feel it on campus at times, we're not in the new atheist dogmatic materialism anymore. People are questioning. And I know that you might be aware of this survey that happened in 2021 in England and Wales that talked about Christianity being on the decline. What you might not be aware of is, in the no religion category, 50% said that they were open for the existence of God. They just weren't sure. In the other religion category, there's also been a huge rise in people searching into the occult, wearing crystals, searching for something spiritual. So what I am seeing in culture and society is, people are spiritually active, people are searching, people are asking questions, people are looking for something beyond just what they physically see. We've had a mental health pandemic, as well as all kinds of other pandemics, rising wars. We are now at a time when people want to know, is this all there is, or is there something more? And what I would just say to you is, for me growing up in Northern Ireland, this was the stuck thing. When I was a teenager, it just felt like, here's some arguments. But you know the difference when I was an adult searching for truth? It wasn't a theory, it was a person coming to know Jesus, having his presence in my life, it actually being a real experiential relationship and not just a theory. That broke me from just being someone who knew some arguments into someone who actually knew Jesus. And so he is unique. Final thought, and then if you've got a question, we'll take those in. Jesus is unique. He doesn't just offer you some methods of meditation. That might help your lived experience. It doesn't set you free. He's not just offering you a path of obedience like we see in some religions, or escapism in some religions. What's Jesus' vision for this world is that we're physical because he wanted us to be. We're in a world because he wanted it to be. But it's heaven and earth. In the future, Revelation 21, this earth will be made new again, and we will live in it physically and spiritually with God. And that is unique through Jesus, because he says, if you trust in him, you're forgiven. Done deal. That's why I stand before you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the talk so much. We've got a Q&A, I believe, now.
Will we just take the questions in? Just happy for me to take them in. Okay, I want to really respect that I'm obviously coming to you with a case with you, but I want you to have the space to question, push back, object. I fully expect that you are investigating for yourself. If you want to take the QR code, I'm sure the guys can tell me what the questions are through that, if you keep an eye on Slido. If anyone wants to stick up their hand and ask a question that way, we can take it in as well.
I was going to say, when I was a student here, and I'm a full member of staff, the thing that really struck me was that actually the CU and other groups were mostly scientists and mathematicians rather than other practices, because they knew that in science they didn't have all the answers and it didn't disprove God. I'm wondering whether there's a change in that, whether people are recognizing science as not having all the answers and therefore having to go and look, or whether people still have that attitude of, well, science has all the answers, then if I don't do science, then I just trust them that God doesn't exist.
Thank you for that. Two things, maybe as a response to that. One is, I think because the new atheist-style dogmatic argument has floated around now for a couple of decades, even secular philosophy faculties would be unlocking some of the logic that they're using. So even non-Christian philosophy departments would be saying, this is not proof, this is not proven. So I think because that's happened now for 20 years, that some of that's actually just being unlocked. The second thing to say is, I think we're more needy than we used to be. If you kind of imagine that you're out in the ocean and you're in deep water and you're not near the shore, I think that's how a lot of people feel right now. And so a naturalist saying, this is all there is, that's all your hope is, that doesn't get you to the shore. If I do a generative AI search for 8 to 16-year-olds, there's 1 in 5 being diagnosed with a serious mental health issue. If you tell them that there's no ultimate meaning and purpose, that is just not, you could say, the cure to what is a mental health pandemic. So I think people are searching and needy and wanting something more. And that doesn't make Christianity true. It just means that people are more open for the conversation to then engage in what the truth quest is. Have you guys got a question?
Yeah, we've got a few coming through from the Slido, actually. The first one, we've got, do you think that the creation story in Genesis is compatible with the Big Bang Theory?
Yeah. So in Genesis, we have to realize that this creation narrative, it's not written as a scientific mechanism, but it is still telling us truth about the past. So what does it say? In the beginning, God. Then what does it say? The Spirit hovers over creation before day one. So before day one, we have a universe, and before the universe, we have a God creating. And what do we also see? Sentences like, let there be light. So there's nothing in that that needs to create a conflict thesis with theories like the Big Bang. What does the Big Bang say? At one point, the world wasn't here. At one point, it is. We expect that that was in an expansion of heat and light. So that theory and the idea of a creation narrative telling us about God existing and bringing it into being, there's nothing there that is a collision. Now, back where I'm from, in the 17th century, there was a bishop from Armagh who tried to calculate the dates of the earth and claimed that it was 6,000 years old. He did that by adding up all of the characters in the Old Testament and coming to that particular thesis. That's not in the Bible. Genesis does not say how old the earth is. So that's why if the earth is old, there is nothing in the Genesis text that is a direct conflict with the Big Bang theory. Maybe one last comment on that creation narrative. It is just so astounding to me that the other creation narratives, like the Enuma Elish, basically that has creation narratives like the gods are warring, they make matter as a negative thing, they're disinterested in us, the gods are up there. What does Genesis say? I want a world, it's a good idea, you know? And it's even cooler when you get to the part, it's like, the world is good, the sun and moon are good, gets to human beings, and God's like, really good. So, you know, we are reliant on the sun to survive as an energy system. It doesn't even know it's in the sky. It's in the solar system. It doesn't know that it exists. It's not conscious. You're conscious. Genesis says you're more important than the sun. And so sometimes we're warring over these science questions and we're missing the point of what it is actually trying to communicate.
Yeah, I think the next most popular question goes down a similar sort of vein. Can science prove Jesus' resurrection?
So the positive and the negative around Jesus' resurrection is, the negative is we don't have a body. So in science, obviously, to investigate something, you kind of need something to investigate. But there is an empty tomb. So it's not like we can perform something empirical in that kind of way. So I think when we think of science in relation to that event, we're doing so in other grounds. And I think the best way to investigate an historical event is to do a bit of an abductive Sherlock Holmes search for evidence. So what's the sources behind it? You know, is there sources outside the Bible that would affirm that that event happened? Is there reasons to believe? Who saw this? Who saw that? Also, miracles is a supernatural claim, so that's also an investigation of thinking, you know, is it possible for a miracle to take place in the world? So that's more how you would investigate that narrative, and it is a bit about what I'm going to talk about tomorrow when I come to look at those sources. So in proving the resurrection, a Christian cannot come along scientifically and say, we can, in an empirical sense, prove the resurrection, but what they can say is, here are accumulative reasons, aka Sherlock Holmes style, into saying there's at least evidence to consider that as a claim that happened.
That's great. Thank you so much. I reckon we've got time for one more question. We've got, please clarify how the whiteboard examples argues against only science bringing up the truth.
Yeah, so the reason why that is a helpful analogy to me is because if someone is saying science is the only way to truth, so that's what we call scientism. It's a worldview about science, that it is the only way to truth. So I'm just literally taking the worldview statement. That's the claim. This is what you could say, the hypothesis. Science is the only way to truth. So if I take that hypothesis, I can't empirically prove it. There is no experiment. There is no mechanism. There's no way to scientifically provide any form of truth or evidence to that claim. So that's why it's a helpful analogy, because the very claim of the worldview cannot be proven scientifically, which makes it on logic terms erroneous or false. Why I mentioned the whiteboard is, think what else is needed even to make that statement. You're needed, a marker's needed, English literature is needed. There's like multi-disciplines in constructing the sentence, and that's again why it is fallacious logic.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sarah. We have had quite a few questions come in, so please do come chat to her afterwards. I'm sure she'd love to answer them, or even just if you see any other CU people around, ask them, speak to me or Will. But please, please don't leave without getting your questions answered, because we would love to chat through things with you. But I believe it is lunchtime. So in just a moment, we can start heading out towards, you might have noticed the tent on the left. And then we've got food for lunch before we head off. But first, we've got a couple of notices. I don't know if, Will, you wanted to...
We have... Sorry. Yeah, we've got free books at the bookstall. Feel free to grab any. And... yeah, that one in particular.
We've only got 6 copies of these, so grab them before they go. But all these books are completely free, so this is such a good opportunity. I think you can grab them, read them at your own time, and we would also love to chat to you about them as well. There's Uncover books over there as well, which help you read through the Bible, but with a bit of guidance as well. There's 2 very friendly faces over there that would love to give you a bit more information. So please, please do have a look at those as well. We've also got some more talks going on over the rest of today as well. We've got one at 5 on shame. Is there hope in shame? Another one at 6:30 on is there hope amongst all of these religions? It will probably link quite nicely, actually, with what Sarah's just been talking to us about today. So, yes, there is a God, but why Christianity? And that will come with dinner as well. And the 5 o'clock one will have some snacks and drinks as well. So it would be great to see you there. But yeah, I won't hold you up for that much longer. Whenever you're ready, just feel free to head out through those 2 doors towards the marquee, and we can have some lunch.